Good evening and welcome to Spurs Diehards, TTID, Tottenham Till I Die. A very special welcome this evening to my special guest, authoress, screenwriter and Spurs fan extraordinaire, Julie Welch. Good evening, Julie.
Good evening, Ian and Adrian.
And to Adrian, yeah, indeed. Let's start off. You've got a fascinating and interesting life as a writer. So I don't want to waste too much time. I want you to tell us your story. And I think, first of all, my assumption always was that as a young girl, you'd have been dragged to White Hart Lane by your father and became a fan ever since. But nothing could be further from the truth.
No, it's quite. My dad was like all other dads back then in the 1960s. You know, they weren't kind of chummy dads like they are now. In fact, you know, I think he found me deeply uninteresting. It was just waiting for me to grow up. But he was a passionate horse racing fan. And every morning, you know, he used to get the Daily Telegraph racing page and the Daily Mail, and he'd mark out his bets for the day. He was this sort of very Tory businessman, but this was his little sort of sideline. So, yeah, he was really interested in racing, you know, would watch Grandstand every Saturday, all that sort of stuff. Sometimes we'd go to race meetings. And in order to get his attention, basically, I kind of developed this forensic interest in horse racing, which was, I mean, fine, because typical middle-class child, you know, I was terribly into ponies anyway. So horses were just a sort of step up. So anyway, I got really into horse racing when I was about 8, 9. That kind of went on and on. But 1958, the Munich air crash. And my mum, I remember, was really, really upset. And I suddenly thought about football really for the first time, that, you know, it had such an effect on not only the people in Manchester and people who supported football, it just affected the whole country. And I think a sort of seed was planted then that I thought football is really important just to people in a way that other sports aren't. And so that kind of piqued my interest. So I've got a little bit older, went to a new school in London, City of London School for Girls. A lot of Jewish girls went there. And of course, a lot of Jewish girls had Spurs supporting families. And it just happened, you know, I made my best friends with these sort of Jewish girls who talked about Spurs all the time, and it was the double season, and you know, it kind of went from there. I just sort of started getting really interested. The thing about jockeys is, you see, is that, you know, really nice, but they're really sort of teeny tiny, you know, whereas footballers were just gorgeous. I mean, yeah, Danny Blanchard was my hero, my total hero, but my first crush was Bobby Smith, I have to say.
Okay.
So that's really how it started, and you know, I'm so lucky in a way that I've lived through Spurs being good. I've lived through them being the greatest team ever. You know, nothing will ever happen again in my life, which was just as wonderful as Spurs winning the double that year, 1960 to 1961. And the first book about football I ever got was The Double and Before, which was written by Danny Blanchard. And I remember being so impressed that a footballer could actually write a book, you know, and it wasn't ghosted. He'd done it all himself. And then I found out that, you know, actually did a bit of journalism on the side. You know, Danny Blanchard, thinker, philosopher, great footballer. What more could you want? So there you go. That's how it all started. And I got to tell you this.
Yes.
We're jumping on now to those glory days. Taking a bit of a side turning first. When I became a football reporter for the first time, 1973, I was 24 years old. Now you know my age. About the fourth match I went to was at Crystal Palace, Selhurst Park. And it took me ages to write my report because I'm really, really slow. I'm a really slow writer. And so by the time I'd finished my report, stadium in darkness, everybody gone, found my way out, was just sort of standing in a kind of wet kind of way out near the outside of the ground because I couldn't find a taxi. I didn't know where the train station was, couldn't see a bus. And this Mercedes drew up and the door opened and it really was Danny Blanchflower. It was just the most brilliant moment of my life, my hero. And he gave me a lift back to the ground. So when I went to see David Putnam about maybe writing a film for his First Love series, I gave him all sorts of ideas and he was completely underwhelmed. And then he just said, well, how did you get into football? And I just told him this Danny Blanchflower anecdote. And he just said, well, there you are. There's your first scene. So that's how it all happened. So I have Danny Blanchflower to thank for those glory, glory days. And I have David Putnam for actually having the nous to spot an idea. So that's that wrapped up.
It's, it is, and we'll cover some more of those things. But I wrote a little note. I don't know if you can see the screen. Tudor Street.
Yep.
Whether you were still at City of London girls' school at that point, and you're walking along Tudor Street, and
fate, you see, fate again. So yeah, there I am. I think it was well, must have been after Spurs had won the Cup in '61, and I was sort of wandering along, and suddenly saw this there was this long line of kind of porridge-coloured old buildings, but there was this kind of glass case out front, and in it was a picture of Danny Blanchflower, a photo of Danny Blanchflower actually sort of lifting the FA Cup. And it said, if you want to buy this photo, 10 shillings, apply within. So I went in and, well, you had to know the Observer, I suppose. I didn't know it was the Observer then. I just thought it was this sort of amazing place which sold photos of Danny Blanchflower. So, yeah, I kind of needed to get 10 shillings to buy this photo of Danny Blanchflower. And a couple of days later, I went back and got my photo. And I just thought, what an amazing place this whole kind of area, Fleet Street, is, because the City of London School was in Carmelite Street, which is, again, very close to Tudor Street. The Daily Mail building then was sort of down the road, and you could actually hear it during lessons. You could hear all the news vans and drawing up and stuff like that. I don't think you could really hear the printing presses, but there was just this sort of kind of rhythm of the presses rolling the whole time, which kind of lodged into your head. So yeah, I'm getting a bit incoherent here. Sorry.
Not at all.
I didn't know this building was the Observer until I kind of looked up and saw the Observer. It was just all my life has sort of devolved around on that moment, really. The Observer, Danny Blanchflower, Fleet Street. I just thought this whole place is a magic kind of area. And I always thought, one day I'm going to work there. But of course, my mum, who didn't really approve of my kind of life at the City of London School, because I wasn't doing any work, she whipped me away and sent me to a girls' boarding school. So I, had 5 years of lacrosse and matron and stuff like that. But I never lost the faith, well, that's it.
You decided quite early in life that you wanted to be a writer, but that wasn't necessarily being a journalist.
Most writers do decide very early on that they're going to be writers. I mean, I was 6 years old. But I mean, if you want to be a writer, you've got to have a job, haven't you? You can't just sort of starve in a garret. Well, I wouldn't like it. So it seemed perfect for me. The other thing was, of course, that again, from a very young age, it wasn't only horse racing or football. I was passionate about all sports. I mean, boxing, wrestling, possibly not golf, actually. But I always just loved sport. I loved athletics. I loved marathons. I loved the Olympics. I loved, watching Wimbledon every summer. People who are younger don't realize that back then in the summers of 60 and the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s, sport was kind of rationed, wasn't it? It wasn't on tap like it is now. I mean, when Match of the Day was first introduced, that was just magic, wasn't it? Saturday nights, it was, you just look forward to it all week. And then, on Sundays, the big match, again, fantastic. It was so special. And the whole thing about the FA Cup was that on one Saturday in the year, there was a whole day which was absolutely devoted to football. People who are young just don't realize how special it was, because now it's all the time. I've really wandered away from the topic. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I know, because I think it's interesting how you decided you wanted to be a writer, and I think 1968 you won the Daily Telegraph Young Writer of the Year award.
It's 1969, actually.
69. There you go.
What's
the year between friends, Julie? I mean, how that wasn't for journalism though. How did that come about?
No, I just entered the competition.
Wow.
And what did you write about?
Well, you had to write on topic of Britain today, which is a typical kind of Daily Telegraph thing, isn't it? So I just wrote about student life. It was all about drugs and sex, and I thought that was wonderful.
Because what I was going to say is, you would think getting an award like that would immediately have you getting into newspapers and journalism and be an automatic entry, but it wasn't, was it?
No, it wasn't, because I buggered it up totally. Because at the time that I won the award, I was about, I think, 3 months pregnant. So I had to take time off. So what was going to be, my entry into journalism, a job on the Daily Telegraph magazine, turned out to be maternity. So anyway, I kind of emerged from that after a couple of years, and we found a baby minder, and I found a job as a secretary, and again, absolute happenstance. I went to secretarial college. My mother sent me because she thought, I was completely hopeless and needed to do something with my life. So they used to put, like useful, we used to get classified ads pinned up on the notice board of the secretarial college. And I noticed there was an ad for the Observer Sports Department. And I thought, wow, A, the Observer was my favorite paper, and B, the sports department. Oh, so I went along, got an interview, and I was interviewed by this incredibly eccentric sports editor called Clifford Makins, who dressed, basically he dressed like a tramp. He was always pissed, but everybody in Fleet Street seemed to be in those days. But when he interviewed me, I just happened to mention that I'd won this Daily Telegraph award, and the person who had interviewed me for the magazine was Kingsley Amis. And of course, Kingsley Amis was one of his mates. I think he was a bit of a Kingsley Amis fanboy. But as soon as I said that, I'd got the job. The funny thing was that his deputy sports editor was this guy called Ron Atkin, who I walked into the sports department and we looked at each other, Ron Atkin and I I thought, oh God, what a boring man. He was wearing a brown suit and just not interesting at all. And he later told Clifford, the sports editor, he wished that Clifford hadn't given me the job because he wanted the other girl who was interviewed because she had bigger tits. But anyway, long story short, of course, it was Ron Atkin who first commissioned me to write a football report. And it was Ron Atkin who I married.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
But your first son, though, has an interesting godfather.
Well, my second son, actually.
Second son, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought it was,
So, interesting godfather. Well, you could say it was interesting. Yeah, it was a Nottingham connection because Ron was originally from Nottingham, although he got out of it as fast as he could. But he was always a Forest supporter. And he used to interview Cloughie quite a lot. And of course, when Lucas was born, he asked Cloughie to be godfather. And Cloughie agreed, which was wonderful. And although I'm sure Barbara, his missus, was the one who did all the duties. I mean, always got birthday cards, birthday presents, Christmas cards, Christmas presents. Basically, the Cloughs were lovely, absolutely lovely people, fantastic, really, great. The first time I saw Brian was long before this. First time I went up to Forest to report a match. And back then, you didn't get these fancy kind of press conference suites or anything like that, with comfy chairs or anything. You used to have to stand around in a crappy old car park and wait for the boss to come out and deliver a few words. And I was waiting in the crowd of journos. And of course, I was the only female. And Cloughie fixed me with this kind of gimlet eye and said, "You, young lady, who are you? Where are you from?" So I said, "Well, I'm Julie Welch from the Observer." So he said, "Oh, well, we'd better watch what we say then." I'm not going to tell you what I caught Dave Mackay saying.
Yeah, I've read that story.
Yeah.
And don't. Please don't. Yeah.
I didn't know I'd written that. Actually, I'd forgotten it actually went into the Fleet Street Girls.
Yeah.
I'm blushing now.
No, it was you were on the Observer, but you were a secretary. But you say you went to Secretarial College and you learned shorthand and typing at Secretarial College, which
I did.
Which were the staples of a journalist's training in those days.
Well, actually, it wasn't proper shorthand. It was something called speed writing, which was not quite adequate, particularly how I did it. Because if you were a proper journalist, of course, you learned Pitman's. As for the typing, well, yeah, I was quite a whiz at the touch typing, but now I just sort of revert to the way that every journalist did, which is, the two-fingered stuff, rattling away. I don't know. I mean, secretarial skills. I was just a joke as a secretary because I really, really, I was useless. Ron was quite right. Clifford should have employed the one with the big tits, but fate.
But you begin 1973-74 season. You got what I would call your big break. I think you talk to anybody in public life or whatever. There's something that happens that gives them a break, and suddenly I get to do the story. And I think you had a senior journalist at the Observer says, "I'm not doing any more football matches," and along comes Julie.
There was this wonderful guy who is really, everybody will know his name, Arthur Hopcroft, wrote The Football Man, also a really, really good TV dramatist. And he, wrote the scripts for Tinker Tailor, Soldier Spy. Brilliant, brilliant bloke, incredibly neurotic. I loved his football reports. Ron and Arthur and I were sitting in the Blackfriar, which was our local in Fleet Street, one night, and Arthur was just sort of, in one of his neurotic moods, and said, if I have to report another football match, I shall jump under a train. And I just thought, oh, great, That means there's a job going for a football reporter. So, and in fact, Arthur did stop reporting football games. And I said to Ron, well, why don't you send me? And he said, yeah, I was thinking of that. And so that's how it happened, really. It was just a sort of casual bit of dialogue, really. I'd written a few pieces not about football for the paper by then, just features on kind of girly subjects like, I don't know, show jumping and stuff like that, which didn't wasn't too frightening to think of a woman writing about show jumping and horses and all that sort of stuff, tennis. But football was the big one.
No, but you were the first female journalist to enter the press box and submit a report. I mean, did you think you were a trailblazer at the time? I mean, I think one of the things I read in the Fleet Street Girls was girls don't do that kind of thing.
Well, it was, you have to cast your mind back to that kind of period. I mean, it was things that girls could and couldn't do. It was incredibly restricted. I mean, it's hard to sort of fathom it out now that's what it was like. But to be a female, to be a girl walking into a press box, it seemed to be quite a big deal. I mean, I was quite surprised because I just thought, well, I'm me, I'll go in here. I'd never written a live report before. I sort of knew I could do it. And I was just floating on air that day. The match was at Highfield Road, Coventry's ground. It was Coventry v Spurs. So I think they'd been, kind to me to sending me to report on my team. So I'd be able to, tell which player was which, and all that sort of stuff. I didn't think of myself being a trailblazer. No, I just thought, well, I did think, if I do this wrong, then it will set back, journalism, sports journalism for females for a long time. But it's hard to sort of think about it now, looking back. It was just, God, I've lost words really, because if I say it was an amazing experience, that doesn't really kind of conjure up how I felt at the time. I was terrified, and yet I was absolutely exhilarated because I just knew I was doing something special. I mean, I think trailblazer is a sort of modern word. It hadn't been invented then. So I didn't think I was a trailblazer. I just thought, I'm doing something which I have to get right. Firstly, for myself, for my own prospects, but secondly, for, the prospects of all the girls who are, going to follow me.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember. You know full well I'm the son of a Fleet Street journalist, so I know the industry reasonably well, or at least certainly from those days. And you look at it. I can remember there was Janet Street Porter who worked with my dad on the Mail. But if you look at the industrial reporters of his peers or the political reporters, they were all men.
There was this mad woman called Nora Beloff on the Observer who did politics, and the saying was, if Nora Beloff said something was going to happen, you could lay bets on it not going to happen. I mean, it was a very male world, journalism back then, and went on being one for quite a long time. I think, was it Eve Pollard who became the first female editor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of the Express?
Of the Express, yeah. So we're moving, into the 90s, I mean, something like that. It was and yet there were some wonderful women writers. I mean, when I was on the Observer, there was, Catherine Whitehorn. She was just fantastic, just brilliant woman. The Observer was, it was pretty much sort of public school men.
Let's get back to your time in the press box, Julie, because it seems from the anecdotes you've told that there was acceptance versus misogyny, and some were accepting, some were grudging, and one or two, we won't mention any names, were
not till he's dead.
Not till the bastard's dead, I think you said earlier, but not till he's dead.
You knew who your allies were, and I hope that I remember to name all of them in the book. Lovely men, like this wonderful sort of red-faced, ginger-haired Scottish guy called Kenny Montgomery, who worked for the Tabs.
Ken Montgomery,
so kind, so lovely to me, so helpful. Another lovely guy, John Moynihan from the Telegraph. I mean, those people like that really made up for the kind of ones
dinosaurs.
The ones who weren't so helpful. I mean, it was like a very comfortable club, I think, the football press. All these sort of blokes together, and they'd go on football tours with the teams and get up to all sorts of stuff. And I think quite a lot of it was that they didn't really want to have a woman around while they were up to while they were getting up to what they wanted to get up to. But also, I mean, they found it difficult to accept a female in what they thought was their territory. And I couldn't see why I couldn't do it. I mean, basically, I remember being interviewed on Football Focus a few years back, and I just said, well, you don't write with your willy. And that's basically how I looked at it. And I mean, I wasn't the greatest analyst of a football match, but I think, I sort of brought a certain something to my reports. Often I made people laugh.
Particularly for any younger people, younger women that might be watching. I'm sure if they're not watching live, my daughters will switch on. Women in their 30s. The amount of things that women in the workplace, not just journalists, but women in the workplace would have to put up with, that would now get you fired, were quite extraordinary, were they not?
Well, I didn't think it was extraordinary at the time. It was just sort of something you accepted. I mean, you just got groped, basically. There was one well-known journalist who used to sort of I never ever turned my back on him because he'd always ping the back of my bra. I mean, for instance, the most embarrassing thing, and which should never have happened, was when I was reporting a game up at Stoke City, and the manager, Tony Waddington, actually grabbed me and kissed me. And it was just the worst moment, because what do you do?
But that was in a full press room, Julie.
Yeah,
that wasn't in the privacy of his office.
No, it was sort of in front of everybody. But what do you do? I mean, I certainly would never have kind of demanded that he be fired or anything like that. It's just something that I think that the reaction of women of my generation is, quite kind of casual. It happened, get over it. Whereas younger women now would just be rightly completely shocked, to think that sort of thing happens in the workplace.
But the Mohammed Fayed thing, I think, would suggest there's still a long way to go. The fact that can be under the radar for so long. I mean, I don't know if that was something that got talked about in journalistic circles that you would move in.
No, No, never. It was just accepted, honestly. I mean, I can't speak for what happened, at Harrods, because different
No, sure.
different times, different environment. I mean, Fleet Street in the 1970s and early 80s was just. I mean, as I said before, everybody was drunk anyway. Behavior was very uninhibited. Let's put it that way. I mean, you just, as a female, you just sort of, you accepted it. I mean, you, you could sort of, I mean, you if you didn't like it, you'd just shout, stop groping me, or something like that. It was just, it wasn't a matter of kind of mortification or embarrassment in a way.
Going back to the football grounds in the 1970s, I mean, what were the facilities like for women?
Well, basically non-existent. Well, most football grounds anyway were pretty awful, for both sexes. But it'd probably be one ladies' loo at the other end of the ground or something like that. So, I mean, at Highbury, that had a very, very typical Arsenal. They had a very luxurious kind of press set up there. You've got the panelled room with a nice bar where you'd get free drink. You'd get sort of at half time you'd get a wonderful buffet. Chicken legs, sandwiches, stuff like that. And there was this loo actually in the press room, and one of the nicest guys, Jeff Powell of the Daily Mail, he would stand out. If I wanted to use the loo, he'd stand outside and guard it so that nobody else went in.
Eltel's big pal, I think, Jeff Powell.
Yeah. Oh, Jeff. Well, I think Jeff was everybody's big pal. He was very smart.
I mean, I wrote down something in the new Spurs stadium. There are apparently 471 toilets. This is from you, I think.
Yeah.
And 84% are women's cubicles.
Yeah. Good old Daniel Levy, you see, employed the right architect.
Yeah, I bet the comments thing will just light up with that. But am I right in thinking someone said, why are there so many women's toilets? To which somebody just simply replied, Julie Welch.
It's true. It's not. That's not quite right. There's a women's loo in the press centre, and when I went to the opening kind of match, Spurs v Crystal Palace, Sonny scored the first goal in the new stadium. There was this women's loo, and I did overhear somebody sort of saying, "Why is there a women's toilet?" And somebody else said, "Julie Welch," and I glowed. My work here is done. That is my legacy.
And I think I can get that. Your friendship with Danny Blanchflower is well known, but did that last until Danny passed away?
Yep. I mean, when you say friendship, I mean we'd just sort of greet each other at matches, things like that. He was always friendly. He was always nice. It's not like the sort of friendship I have with Steve Perryman, for instance. We're because I've done a couple of books with Steve.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a sec.
Yeah.
But Danny was in those glory days. Well, what was your first screen? I mean, I'm going to say, because there'll be people in the chat that have not seen that. It's on YouTube. You just type in those glory days. I mean, can I call it a football rom-com? Is that a fair description? It's a girl's love affair with.
Yes, it's my love affair with football. I don't know, what would you call it? It's sort of something which is a bit unclassifiable, actually. A rite of passage movie, something like that. I don't know.
Well, Julia, the part played by Zoe Nathanson, is rather. It's not really loosely based on you, is it? It is you.
Well, partly based on me, yes. I mean,
Yeah,
you have to allow for creative license.
absolutely.
Growing up, my parents, my father was very fond of another woman,
Yeah.
and I think it was all meant to be hushed up. But so of course, those glory days was a bit of a truth bomb, really. So I feel a bit bad about that. I do.
No, but yeah. Okay. I mean, there's other stuff, and you're writing. I mean, it's not just football, albeit we are interested in the football. But I'll talk about the other books that you've written. You are the author of the official Spurs biography,
Well, I
which
wouldn't
needs
call
to
it.
be updated with all the trophies
Yeah,
we keep
I
winning.
wouldn't actually call it the official one, but it's the kind of rolling story of Spurs which gets sold in their shop. And fortunately, people keep buying it. And this is the fifth update. It was first commissioned in 2012. So we're talking, just after our first Champions League season. Gareth Bale, that side, Harry Redknapp's Champions League side, Luka Modric, two of the best players ever to play for Spurs. I'll never see goals like Gareth Bale scored ever again. He was just the most magnificent player. And Luka Modric, although all great players are unique, he was a bit of a John White in a way, because he was so kind of fragile and frail to look at. Not that fragile, of course, because I mean he's about 509 now and he's still playing. So, but yeah, that was one of my great teams. So that was the first edition of the biography of Tottenham Hotspur, and we sort of moved through that. We've gone through the young Harry Kane, we've gone through the Pochettino era, we've gone through Mourinho. I don't know. The fourth edition, which came out 3 years back. We just got rid of Mourinho, and Nuno was just in place. And the book usually comes out around this time of year, so I'll give the little plug after I've finished wittering on. So yeah, I'd written up about how Nuno was going to be great and all that sort of stuff, and about 4 weeks before the book came out, Nuno got the boot. So this time I've been absolutely sweating. I keep thinking, Ange, just play it cool. Don't do anything, Ange. Because of course I've bigged Ange up to the skies because I adore him. I think he's fantastic. I just really, really, really hope that it's going to work out for him. So yeah, the fifth edition of the biography of Tottenham Hotspur. It's due to come out. I think the day it actually sees the light will be October the 24th.
Yeah.
And you can get it via the club. It's in the shop. You can actually go onto the website of the publisher, Vision Sports Publishing. And off the top of my head, I can't give you the URL because,
yeah, no, that's okay.
But
there was a magnificent book. In fact, in my view, probably the best book that's ever been written about anything, because I'm in it.
Yeah, thank
because
you.
I think I got a message from you saying, "Hey, Ian, I'm writing this book. Would you like to help me contribute?" And that was a book you wrote with a certain young
Mr.
man
Perryman.
from Ealing,
Yeah.
Steve Perryman, about iconic victory. Tell us about that book.
Well, again, it's when you start, before you actually write a book, sometimes you just get this sort of weird idea in your head. I don't know whether it's meant to be the divas, but talking to you. Some creatures in on the airwaves. I just suddenly thought, nobody. wouldn't it be lovely to do a book about that goal of Ricky Villas at the end of the the cup final replay, because it was, one of the Spurs moments, that goal. And it just kind of went from there. And I'd been chatting to Steve about maybe us two writing a book together. And it just sort of came from that, because I thought, well, let's do a book about that cup run. Because it was the first really good thing that had happened to Spurs for a long time. Well, I mean, Ossie and Ricky had sort of arrived in England 2 years back, but nothing had quite gelled. And then the summer of 1980, Keith Birkinshaw signed Archie and Garth, and we were away. And I don't know who your favourite Spurs side ever is, but I mean, there's a sort of pecking order with me. Obviously, the double side, and I loved the kind of 2016, 2017 Pochettino side. But my favourite, I think, ever is the 1981 cup winning side, because I was a working reporter then.
Sure.
And I actually got to kind of report on some of those games, and I was reporting the game at Hillsborough when there was that Leppings Lane.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to contribute to the book, because I was actually there very early and witnessed what was happening. And for you can get that on YouTube again for people in the chat. How close Hillsborough 89 could easily have been Spurs and Hillsborough 81.
Why did nobody learn any lessons from what happened?
Well, that's the question. My question, I never saw it properly answered, was Spurs were at the Leppings Lane end and the Wolves were at the Kop end. And so Spurs got the small end, and Wolves got the big end. And if you look at all the cup finals, again, we're going back for any younger people, where cup semi-finals were usually played at Hillsborough or Villa Park, and the small Liverpool were at the Leppings Lane end. The much smaller supported Nottingham Forest were at the Kop end. And you look at that, South Yorkshire Police must have had a view that it was easier to police the bigger support in the smaller area. Don't ask me why, but
that's the only logic I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it unfolding from the stand opposite the main stand. So the Leppings Lane was to our right, and you could see and you could hear, because you can see over the back of the stand.
You got a better view of it than we did, because we were in the press box. It was just people were getting on the pitch, and everybody was going, "Oh, hello, crowd trouble again," and there was sort of just general sort of enthusiasm for a story.
But even when the crowd was building up before the game, you could see outside the ground, because there's that bit on the right-hand side where it sort of goes up, or it did, sort of was elevated, but you could see through the gap. But there were thousands of Spurs supporters still outside, and the Leppings Lane end was full. So, but
I mean,
learned.
That book, which I did with Steve Perryman, I mean, it contained, well, apart from your memories in that particular section, our friend Alan Fisher, who was actually really caught up with it, his account of it was absolutely terrifying. That he couldn't move.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to be really self-indulgent. That's my grandson come on to say hi, Grandpa. I'll go over and do some stuff on the chat later. I didn't realise I didn't realise your grandson was watching. In that case, I'll stop swearing. No. Yeah, well, no, that's okay. You should hear his mother. But you and Steve have done that book, and again, can that be got at the club shop as well?
It can, yeah. I think. I mean, again, if there are copies left, it's certainly.
There's still one in my bedroom.
Yeah, I've got two. I know
Yeah.
how it ends. And I had a nice time after that, writing a book called Double Acts.
Yeah, go on.
A modern history of Spurs in 10.5 striking partnerships. So that came out last year. No, early this year. So that was fun because I could write about all my favourite striking partnerships from the double winning side onwards.
Yeah. I remember on Twitter talking to Steve Archibald about this, but you talk about striking partnerships. I mean, I was Greaves and Gilzine, and then Chivers and Gilzine, or Chivers and Greaves, and whatever. But I said to Steve about Crooks and Archibald, what a brilliant piece of inspiration by Keith Birkinshaw to pick a one player from Aberdeen, one player from Stoke, and put them together, and they were magical together. And he said, no, we worked really hard on the training ground to get that right. Worked really hard.
But two very bright guys, very smart. I mean, which I think helped. It was so lovely because they were kind of polar opposites in personality. I mean, Garth, who I interviewed Garth really early on in his first career, because in those days you could get to know players properly, and you could pick up a phone and interview them.
Sure.
But so Garth, really kind of bright young lad, and Steve, I mean, had this reputation for being sort of morose. But I remember when he went to Barcelona, Terry Venables took him there, and I interviewed him at Barcelona, and he was lovely, just so chatty, fantastic, lovely. Maybe much nicer living in Barcelona than playing football at White Hart Lane. I don't know, but two very smart guys, lovely people.
But they work so well together. I think, again, for younger people, you mentioned when Ozzy and Ricky signed, and it was the Daily Express, I think, that got that scoop. But it's hard, I think, when you look back, that how revolutionary that was for Tottenham to pick up two players from South America. Because I always say, hang on a minute, in my day, a foreign player came from Scotland, like Archibald, and an overseas player came from Ireland.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Keith Birkinshaw had to have some front, didn't he? Just to walk, just to fly to Argentina and sort of say to Aussie, sign for us. I've got a lot of admiration for Birkinshaw as a manager. You just wish. What if he'd been 50 years younger? What if he'd been starting out in management today? What could he have achieved with all the sort of opportunity and money and things like that's in the game? Fantastic manager, still going strong, of course. Hasn't fallen apart yet.
Yeah, no. Let's and then the last book, Spurs book, at least I want to bring up, is a book, again, Rob's someone I've got to know through social media. Rob White is, and I think he was only a few months old when his father died. Adrian, you may be old enough to have seen John White play.
Yeah, he was 27. He was the Glenn-Hoddle of his day, but he had more. He was more more movement, more in position. He moved quicker. Whereas Glenn, he seemed to make time stand still when he was on the ball.
I think Julie, I'm too. The reason I asked that is I'm too young to have seen John White play, but I hear. I mean, and it's easy to glorify, dead people, but I gather Bill Nicholson was ready to build his next title chasing team around John White, and it came to a tragic end on the golf course.
Kids were crying in the classroom when he got struck down at Lightning and Cruise Hill Golf Course. They were crying in the classrooms.
I was on school holiday at the time, and I just remember seeing the headline in the newspaper. I mean, such a shock. Because it was just just bloody typical, wasn't it? You know, just the sort of thing that would happen to Spurs. You know, the guy who's going to be their next captain. I mean, sort of. It's hard to compare, you know, one genius player with another. I talked about earlier about John White maybe being, you know, an early form of Luka Modric. There was also an element of John White about Christian Eriksen. In the way, you know, Eriksen would run and run, and John White was very mobile because, of course, he was actually a good cross-country runner. There was that mobility about him. There was the sort of invisibility factor. Did I say that right? Invisibility. I haven't even had alcohol. There was an invisibility factor about John White because, you know, small, quite pale-faced, you know, the fair hair and things. And he was, you know, very slim and slight, because you'd have this, you know, these really burly guys like Dave Mackay and Bobby Smith. You know, most footballers, when you meet them, they're absolutely enormous. But of course, John White would have been this kind of, you know, little frail Scottish guy. And I think he was, because he was so fast and so unobtrusive, he just didn't get a notice. So, you know, he could sort of do genius things by stealth almost. You know, he was the kind of player who never got picked up till it was too late. He had fantastic anticipation, which is what all great footballers have, of course.
Yeah, the footballing IQ, it was that. If a Spurs player was struggling, look around for someone to give the ball to, all of a sudden John White would be in the space for the ball.
He would always, he would have made himself available. Sorry, fog in my throat. He would have made himself available. I mean, you know, you get that with a player like Harry Kane. He's there, isn't he?
I find, Julie, when people start to compare two great players when they're different, especially if they're as different as apples and oranges, I always say to them, look, both players were great in their own way. And it's the easiest way to do it, to say they're both great in their own way, because no two players are identical anyway.
No. Julie, I'm going to ask any one of the people in the chat, if there's actually a question you want to ask, a polite one, and it mustn't involve anything Dave Mackay said at a press conference, particularly as my grandson's watching. If there's any questions you want to ask that we can put to Julie before we wrap up, please put them. I will go through the chat. But Julie, a couple of questions for you. Your favourite Spurs? I think you probably answered that, but who's your favourite Spurs player ever?
Oh, this is so hard to say, because, you know, there are players you love in every generation. So, and ever is such a sort of, it's too definite a word. I mean, obviously Danny, because he was the first player I really kind of hooked on to. My teenage crush, Bobby Smith. Kind of moving on into more modern times. I mean, I adored Alan Gilzean. You know, he was so special. It's like you were saying, every great player is great in their own way. So it's, I mean, you know, although people sort of say he wasn't all that, my granny crush was Eric Dyer. I'm
saying nothing.
There are two. I mean, there are two criteria basically. There's players who are your favourite because they're great, and there are players who are your favourite because you fancy them. And I mean, I don't know what it's like for blokes, but this is me anyway. And I adored Eric Dyer. I was gutted when he left for Bayern. But I'm speaking to you as a woman who had a sort of small crush on Lewis Holtby when. Most remember.
Favourite Spurs goal, Julie?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Well, it would have to be Ricky's, wouldn't it? In the cup final. Although there's another one which Ricky scored, the third goal in the semi-final, the replay at Highbury. I've always loved goals scored by Ricky. I just, just great,
Ricky,
always special.
The third goal, did you say, or the first goal?
The third goal.
Third, Ricky.
Yeah.
My pal who's been on the show, Jem Silverstone, had it, and he had one of those. Oh, what was it? It wasn't Beta. There was VHS and Betamax, and there was another system, and they had the other system, but they had it on Match of the Day recorded, and you could see, if you've ever seen this goal, watch it on YouTube, and Glenn Hoddle grabs hold of Ricky, and you can lip read it. It says, "Oh, Ricky, what and it's really funny. But that was what, I mean, to me, Adrian, you as well, that was one of the best Spurs games ever. To be three sides have three sides around Highbury, and the noise of winning there and taking Wolves apart. It was almost worth that terrible Clive Thomas decision to create the replay in the first place. But that's fair dues. Best stadium other than Tottenham you've ever visited?
Oh, right. Well, of course, when you visit as press, you go by the kind of snacks you get at half time. You got at half time. So I always kind of like going to Villa Park, actually, because they had a really nice kind of press room. Best stadium other than Tottenham, hard to say. I mean, once you've been to the new Tottenham Stadium, I mean, you never really want to go anywhere else, do you?
I go, because I live in Scotland, I don't go to every game, but I must have been a dozen times or so now, and I still get off the train and think, is this really ours?
I tell you, although I don't know why I picked this out, but for sheer prettiness, the approach to the Hawthorns, West Brom Stadium, is really lovely. So what you're going to see in there ain't so lovely, but it's if you're going to sort of, I don't know what your criteria are for best stadiums, really.
Well, it's not mine, it's yours.
I used to love going to Upton Park. Adored it. I really liked Upton Park. And the first time I walked past it after West Ham had left for the London Stadium and they'd pulled it down, I nearly wept. I had so many happy memories of sharing a sherry with Ron Greenwood in the manager's office. It was the worst sherry I've ever tasted. Used to invite the press up there. And
there was one question I wanted to ask you about Danny Blanchflower, and that's when 74, I think it was. When Bill Nicholson resigned, the plan was to make Danny the manager, was it not? And the board rejected it. Or Bill Nicholson wanted Danny to be the manager, and the board rejected it and decided.
I think they were quite right too, because when you look at what Danny achieved or didn't achieve as a manager, I just think, thank God he didn't get the Tottenham job.
Sullied his reputation.
Yeah.
Julie. Steve Perryman, 2 League Cups, 2 FA Cups, 2 UEFA Cups, 853 games. How did you become associated with Stevie?
Basically, I'd interviewed him for the first Spurs biography. I mean, I'd met him before, but this was he was living in. He and Kim were living in Exmouth at the time. He was connected with Exeter City, and I went up there to interview him about his Spurs life, and the three of us had a nice lunch, and I went back to their house, and it just went from there. We just sort of I got we used to sort of exchange phone calls from time to time. Just somebody I like very much. I think
Do you know if, like, in these later years, whether he's like fallen back in love with the club? I know when Birkinshaw left and that, is he still resentful, or is he softened?
I think I can't really speak for Steve, but okay, he's in contact with the club, obviously. But you'd have to ask him what his attitude is. No.
See if he'll come on. I know he's done a few of these streams, but we'll see.
Well, he does. Yeah.
I want to ask you about the future. And I know I don't want to get you involved in the Levy and stuff, but there are a lot of fans, perhaps that haven't grown up in the era we've grown up, that feel starved, if not robbed, of success. Do you see with the way the club's run and the way the club's going that success will come back?
The trouble, it comes down to how football is now.
Yeah.
It's who's got the most money. It's not the same. Saying that, of course, in the 60s, Spurs were the club which had all the money. It's just sort of, on a much bigger scale now. I just hope that, sometime soon, before I put my clogs, maybe, I'd love to see Spurs win another title. Will they, under the present circumstances? I don't know. I thought that with Pochettino we had a chance, but that kind of petered out for whatever reason. I think that it was important to get the stadium built because White Hart Lane was hopeless, the old White Hart Lane, in terms of what money you could make out of it.
Sure.
I know that there's a lot of disapproval about the fact that, there's a lot of other activities which now go on at the stadium. I don't mind at all. I'm just somebody, they always say, you're Spurs till you die, and you are, basically. I'm happy that the whole thing is, I'm happy that we got a great stadium. I'm hopeful that Ange Ball will work and not be a complete disaster, at least until the new book comes out.
Yeah,
I like the way that we've got a lot of really interesting and talented younger players now. I was talking about Mikey Moore on another chat show podcast recently, and I said, it's really too early to tell what's gonna happen, but he's not Glenn Hoddle yet, and of course he's a different kind of player because no player will ever be like Glenn Hoddle, but yeah, I sort of have this fantasy that Archie Gray might might end up being the new kind of, I don't know, Dave Mackay figure. Maybe. I'm not going to say what Dave Mackay said. I like the look of Lucas Bergvall. Mickey van der Ven is, something else again. Interesting comment from Mr. Perryman about Mickey, which is that he's not so good over 4 or 5 yards. To get going, he needs 50 yards. He's maybe not quite in control of his legs for the first few yards, because he's more like I don't know, a 400-meter runner or a miler than a sprinter. But it's an interesting point. I mean, I think Van der Ven is going to be fantastic for us. You live in dread when we get a player who's really mustard, that 2 or 3 years, and then Real Madrid is going to come in for them. That's always one of my fears when we get someone good.
Julie, I've got to talk about this player. It's one of my favourites. When people ask me who's your favourite player, I say the double side, right? But if I pick a player, it's Glenn Hoddle. We all have a favourite. Scored on his debut away at Stoke in a 2-1 win. And I believe he scored in his last game at Spurs before he went off to France. Have you got any stories about Glenn? Have you met Glenn many times, or? I
only met Glenn when he was managing Chelsea. I never met him as a Spurs player. So I can't give you insights about what sort of bloke or whatever at all. And the other thing about Glenn is, of course, that, again, completely unique. You will never, ever, ever get another Glenn Hoddle.
Yeah.
I mean, no one will ever come close. But the thing is, are you Bale or are you Hoddle? Greatest player for Spurs, you know, not in modern times, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I suppose because I saw more of him, I'd probably go say Gareth Bale. But you know, again,
better than Cliff Jones.
That's different. I'm talking about modern times.
Okay. Because I've heard people say, "Oh, Bale's the greatest player to play for Tottenham," and I go, "He's not even the best Welsh left winger to play for Tottenham." But
I think
they produce left wingers well, so they do produce wingers.
Yeah,
I think that the one thing about Gareth Bale was that, you know, the injuries held him back.
Yeah.
And is the one thing that you could say. You can't talk of him in the same breath as, let's say, Messi or Cruyff or
Sure.
you know, one of the world greats because of that. But he was I mean, again, you could say the same for Glenn Hoddle, but you know, Bale was just the most special player. I've got his pictures on my wall, but you it's not the wall behind me. But yeah, there's a picture of Gareth Bale embracing AVB. During AVB's troubled regime,
with Holtby, Blanchflower, and Co.
Not in that way.
Smith.
Not just my Gareth Bale thing is not a granny crush thing.
No. Okay. Adrian, do you want to? I'm going to look at the chat while we're doing. I'm just trying to find if there's anyone got any questions. I'm in trouble from my pal Kev Clark because he said. I'm in it as well, which was, of course, the reference to the book, which yeah. Oh, you've changed that. That's all right. Yeah.
No, you put that in. I was looking back through the chat because the chat's
funny,
been very well behaved.
Stuff.
Thank you to all in the chat, by the way. Right.
Yeah.
Get rid of this.
Yeah. Thank you, absolutely, everybody, and for being so restrained in your comments. I can't see that, Julie. Can you put that back up?
It's difficult, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, okay.
There we are.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one.
A question on the biography of Spurs. Now, I'm sorry, I haven't read it right. I've seen it right. But because I was interested, did you have a starting date for that? Did you go back to like John Cameron or Peter McWilliam?
Yeah, right from the very beginning.
Right.
Yeah,
like,
on the marshes.
The thing that really fascinated me when I look back through the history, and I've studied Spurs history, is how Peter McWilliam and Vic Buckingham were pioneers of total football that the Dutch played in the 70s. Especially Vic Buckingham being manager of Ajax and winning the Eredivisie, and then he leaves and goes back, gives Johan Cruyff his debut, and who followed him? Rinus Michels followed him, and then where does Vic Buckingham end up? You couldn't make this up. He ends up manager of Barcelona, and he wins the Cup of Geremillicio, and in 1970, and narrowly misses out on the double, but then he won the FA Cup with West Bromwich Albion, and he also won the amateur FA Cup with Pegasus, didn't he, with the joint Oxford and Cambridge University team when they beat Bishop Auckland in the final. See, I know my history, right? And then when he leaves in 70 at Barcelona, who follows him again? Rinus Michels again follows him to Barcelona. You couldn't make it up. And then, and the other fascinating thing was like when Arthur Rowe was playing alongside Vic Buckingham, who come from the Northfleet Academy when McWilliam was manager till 42, till he retired. He thought he was too old to continue. Arthur Rowe goes out to Hungary because they want to learn the Spurs way of playing football, faster track football. And then the Hungaries do us the honour of coming at Wembley, spanking us 6-3 and 7-1 in Budapest. And then 1960, and then in 1960, you get, while we're winning the double and Vic Buckingham's winning the Eredivisie, the Galloping Major, you know, Puskas, who scored a measly 618 goals in 690 games and 84 goals in 85 internationals. He's at Real Madrid with Di Stefano and Gento, right? Because they won it the first 5 years on a turn because the European Cup was inaugurated in 1955. And then when he goes off coaching, this is, if you're superstitious in the chat, you'll like this next bit, right? So, or you believe in omens. So like he travels around Europe, and then Puskas ends up in Australia, wins a couple of things. Then he ends up at a club called South Melbourne Hellas, where his footballing and philosophy leaves a lasting impression on one Angelos Postecoglou.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course.
So you could, it's in the, it's like it's in the football ether. So sometimes you think if you believe in omens, Ange is a right fit, you know. And I want to believe that. I really want to believe that so much, you know.
Yeah, nice.
So
I'm just going to answer a question that Kev has asked.
Yeah,
you know, Kev is a good
What's
friend.
my
of
favourite
others before we let you go, Julie.
Yeah, my favourite is Bill Nicholson's autobiography.
Okay.
So because it's just Bill's voice, just very plain speaking and very honest. So that's when I'm writing about Spurs, I always sort of have a good read of that. So that's my favourite Spurs book, I think.
What did you think of the Glory game, Hunter?
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, loved it. There's
I mean, another of the truly great writers of his generation as well.
Yeah, what, Hunter Davies?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still around, you know.
Yeah, oh no, yeah.
Still writing. Like we were talking earlier about, you know, whether writers ever retire, and they never do. Just keep on
absolutely.
As long as somebody gives you money, and even if somebody doesn't give you money, you can't stop yourself.
George always says no one ever would ever undertake, you know, that mind-bending hard task of writing if it wasn't for that imposter, the demon inside that urges you to write. I've paraphrased what he said, but I mean, like, you know, and you can understand.
We've got another question.
There's another question there. I mean, and you know, how it's all relative, but how good were they?
The stock answer that I always give, I suppose, is that there were world-class players. You'd have Blanchflower, Mackay, White, and Jones, and the rest of them, any team in any other club in the country would have wanted on their side. And they had some strong subs, which they needed, you know, later on. But the double season, I think that 4 of that, I'm just trying to think, there were very few substitutes needed. You know, if almost the side was almost intact every time they turned out. Just how good were they? Well, they were bloody great, weren't they? They were the best football team ever.
Bill Nicholson said, one manager turned around, he said, playing against Spurs was like chasing sparrows.
Right, okay, that's a good description. I'll risk all Queen Ellie. I think you've met Ellie. But I mean, I just can't resist putting that up. And Louis, if you're still here, I'm sorry, Caroline. That's yeah.
The days before implants, yeah.
There's a question, Lord Rodney Trotter. Who was the funniest player? I mean, that's obviously me, because anyone who saw me play fell about the place laughing. But I think it probably means professional player.
The funniest player? Well, you're talking about. Are you talking about, you know, players who were such prats that they just made you laugh out of pity, or really witty ones? Actually, a non-Spurs player who was really witty was a guy called George Berry, who played for Wolves.
He played in that 81 Cup final, didn't he?
He did. He did.
So he was in their defence.
Yeah. It wasn't the greatest defender.
I was going to say, I've seen Milk turn faster.
But yeah, lovely, very funny guy.
Yeah.
Wittiest player, John Toshak was very witty.
Yeah.
I mean,
did you meet him at Liverpool or when he was managing in Spain?
Yeah. No, I was thinking when he was at Liverpool. But is that the Liverpool side, which had Highway in? they were great. They were, you know, just across the board. They
Joshak Keegan.
Yeah. Well, particularly Keegan, but I mean, all of them. They would. It's just a lot of people even now think that footballers are thick, but they are not. They're very bright guys. They might not be academic because they haven't had the time, but they're very smart.
Was it Malcolm? I read a quote. It may have been in your book, but Malcolm McDonald says, you know, at 8, by the time you're 8, you know, you're not interested in
Spyrogyra.
Spyrogyra. It's how you can get the overlapping left back into play.
That was so nice to be a football writer in that generation, because you know you did actually meet the players and get to take them to lunch, or sometimes they'd take you to lunch. It was a nice world. And now you only get to interview them if they want to sort of promote their charity, which is a bit kind of worthy.
You talk about front pairs of strikers, but that if you're talking in midfield, that midfield pairing of Blanchflower and Mackay, my God.
Oh, yeah.
Danny spraying the ball all over the place. Like, and Mackay, I mean, like, if you want someone alongside you in a fight, he's the guy.
Yeah, I think Bobby Smith would have been quite useful for that as well.
Yeah, we got him from Chelsea.
I'm just going to say, John Goodman here, long time family friend. He's Jeffrey Goodman, the Mirror's industrial editor's son. But I've got another question for you from Ellie. Push at 50-51 push and run side. That's, you know, you'd have been too young to see that, Julie, and you certainly, Adrian. Push and run side. My dad said our best ever side.
Well, you know, when
difficult.
When I can remember when I was sort of in my 20s, I wasn't interested in the push and run side. I mean, it was prehistory. I had no kind of feeling about them whatsoever. I mean, Spurs started for me with the double side. Everybody, all the others were just sort of blokes wearing long shorts and stuff like that.
The thing that stands out for me about the 49-50 that won the second division championship after Rome, the 50-51 when they followed it up with the first division title. Well, we know the three players that stand out. Obviously, you had Bill Nicholson at wing back. You had Alf Ramsey, who'd gone and be
Ronnie Burgess.
The player they really rave about is Eddie Bailey as well. Like, you know,
yeah.
I mean, they reckon. I didn't see him play, and I can't. But they reckon he was absolutely brilliant. But I mean, like, you know, he must have been good because they won 2 titles on the turn, you know. So
I wonder if we sort of look back at footballers and they become kind of better in our mind's eye. I mean, if you'd seen Eddie Bailey play, if we'd seen Eddie Bailey play, I mean, I wonder what our opinion would have been of him. I'd hate to offer an opinion on any player that I hadn't, you know, actually seen.
I met Tommy Harmer at an Enfield match, actually. Did you ever meet Tommy? He's a lovely fellow. So small.
By the time sort of I got around to meeting him, he wasn't very well. So you know, not the best impression that you can get. Another question.
There's one. Sorry, just before you answer that, Julie. Mark Cousins says, "Will you check your WhatsApp messages?" I don't know what that is, Adrian, but will you check your WhatsApps? Julie says, "Yeah." Who would you say is your favourite Spurs player who never played for Spurs in the past and in modern times too? There's an easy one for you.
Okay. In the past, Trevor Brooking. And in modern times, now that's a difficult one. Rodri.
Roger, some player. Yeah.
One of our admins, Mark, he's a big. He's probably the biggest fan of Gary Mabbott because he's got diabetes as well and shares it with him. So he wanted to know. I don't know why he didn't ask in the chat of any of your experiences with Gary Mabbs, who did a lot of work for people during COVID, didn't he? On the phone and things like that, you know. phoning people. Did you have much experience with Gary Mabbutt, Julie, at all?
Yeah. He's sort of, the great ambassador, isn't he? He's always available if you need him. Again, interesting guy. Very self-contained, very self-possessed. Probably got to be one of the best defenders who's ever played for Spurs. And you just got to admire him, haven't you, as well, to have kind of achieved what he's done, bearing in mind
his brother Kevin played as a striker for Crystal Palace, as I remember. We were rumored to be linked with him one time. When it gets to old people, I'm a bit frightened to ask questions in case they're no longer with us. Do you know what I mean? You get in that sort of mode. I don't know anything about his brother.
You're talking about Palace and journalism. Do you remember, was it Jerry Queen, Scottish player, played for centre forward for Crystal Palace?
Queen at the King at the Palace. I remember that observer.
He played for Lake Lorient as well, didn't he?
He was sent off for fighting. And the headline, I think, The Guardian the following day was "Queen in Brawl at Palace." I mean,
brilliant. Those are the days of The Guardian.
I mean, some brilliant subbing to come up with that, but
the headline, the Bill Good one, was when Celtic lost to Caledonia, wasn't it? And the headline was "Super Cali go ballistic, Celtic are atrocious."
Yeah, I was in Manchester working that. I couldn't believe
one of my favourites is "Ding Dong at the Dell." From the that was a very good Observer headline from the past. I miss the Dell. If you're talking about favourite football grounds, I'd forgotten the Dell. That was definitely one of my favourites because the press accommodation there was just fantastic. It was like sitting in this Edwardian green conservatory. There was all this sort of fancy wrought iron work that was sort of surrounding you. And ladies used to come with a tea on a tray at half time and sandwiches, and you'd pass the tray of sandwiches along. It was brilliant. I really miss the Dell, and I miss one of my favourite non-Spurs managers, Laurie McMenemy. It was a smashing man.
Character. There you go.
When they used to put the half-time scores up round the pitch with all the alphabet letters, the CFAX and all
that takes me back.
And I remember when they used to read out the scores, and the one that all sticks in my mind was when they're going through the Scottish leagues and they were going East 5-4, 4-5-5. I mean, you couldn't make that one up. It's poetic.
Bobby Smith once nicked my ball playing on the Knicks tennis court, the local rep. When I was stripped back, he said, "F off, Sonny." Imagine Nicholas number 9 played tennis at the local. I think it's right. Julie, you mentioned horse racing before and what have you. I've got an interest in a couple of horses, and what's fascinating is that you talk to the jockeys, you meet up with the jockeys before the race, not during it, but after the race, and hopefully not during it. But and whether in the owners and trainers area or outside or in the paddock, they are also wonderfully friendly and normal. Whereas footballers now, you think they just look down their nose at you as something that's got on the end of your shoe.
I think that because they're sort of public property now in some weird way, it's self-protective, don't you think?
No, absolutely.
They can't relate to. It must be a bit like being a member of the royal family. You couldn't go out to an ordinary shop. You couldn't go and buy your knickers at M&S, could you? Because this sort of crowd would kind of assemble around you, like the heavenly host. It must.
I'm just trying to picture the Queen and the buying the knickers in Marks and Spencer.
You could meet Bobby Smith and Dyson over Walthamstow Dog Track. I met Chivers. Chivers Peters and Ralph Coates in the Orson Groom pub in Edmonton.
I've been. I did quite a lot of reporting at Old Trafford, and I can remember just sort of being at this party, talking to Bobby Charlton and Pat Crerand, and it was just so normal. it was just, it was kind of, I suppose, looking back, it must have been a sort of weird existence in a way. But you know, you just became friends with footballers. I mean,
yeah. You find Gills leading the Stag and Hounds. Gilly was always in a pub.
No. Oh, absolutely. My phone, by the way, just for those of you not my phone has flashed up with news that apparently there's been a third attempt to shoot Donald Trump. All I can say is the shooter must be getting lessons from Timo Werner. That is all I can say. Because sorry, Julie. Before we knock off, unless anybody's got anything else in the chat, this is the link to YouTube to the those glory days, and it's a wonderful watch. Takes us back into an era when everything was innocent and Spurs were brilliant. There you go. So nothing dodgy, Mark. No, I'm absolutely sure. Unless anyone else in the chat very quickly has got anything else, I am going to let this lovely lady get back to her life in southeast London. I think that's where you live anyway. But somewhere like that.
That's it. Sunny Blackheath.
Yeah, Blackheath. Right. Well, I knew that, but I wasn't going to put the address up online just in case, you know.
Big place, Blackheath. They'll never find me.
Well, that's true. Can I give you on behalf of all of us at Spurs Diehards, Adrian, our founder, but Ellie, Mark in the chat. There was some other comment. Oh, no Mark today, and someone else had commented. I lost all my earlier stuff. You know, this is Ian's show. Shut up. You know, but yeah. I mean, otherwise, if there was loads of people here asking you questions, it was going to turn into an interrogation, and that just was never going to work. So, can I give a very special thanks to you for coming on and giving us the benefits of your insights and experiences. So thanks, Julie. Thanks very much. And we'll probably just have a wrap up here, but you want to love us and leave us. I'll no doubt see you on Twitter or Facebook.
We'll see you in the back room.
Soon.
We will meet again.
Thanks, Julie.
Right, I'm going to elope with Gareth Bale now.
You can go off with Gareth Bale. Take care. I've actually just taken her off because I don't know what she was going to. She'd left, but right. I don't know. I'm probably going to say we'll knock it off there, Adrian. I don't know. Anyone in the chat's got anything else? There's an international break. England won 3-1 today. Didn't look as bad as they did the other night, but I was cooking and preparing the last bits for this show. So
Julie's in the back room. We'll see her in the back room. Yeah. Thanks to all of you in the chat. Thanks for being civil. Yeah.
Yeah. And no, absolutely. I think that was important. You did wonder anything might get, and we might get invaded by whatever. But
you never know with social media,
there, guys. Adrian, are you doing a show on Tuesday?
Tomorrow, Tuesday? I mean, Mark and Ellie are doing the show tomorrow. I think it's sort of like just a relaxing show. I think, but I'll be doing a preview of the West Ham Tuesday at 8:00.
Brilliant. Okay, and I'll be back. I'll be back next Sunday talking about our 5-0 win at the London Stadium. Yeah,
the stadium. No, we're at home for that game.
Thanks, John. It was different to what I expected, but I think what is it they say about no battle plan survives the first encounter with the enemy, and I think no interview survives the first encounter with the interviewee. So everything I had sort of written down and planned sort of got jumbled up a bit, but I think we got
no, it's a good show.
Most of it.
Very good show.
Anyway, thanks, John. No doubt we'll speak sometime. We'll end it there, Adrian. We'll just have a quick couple of minutes, and then I'm gonna. It's up. Was it 10:30 here? So 10:30 here. So I'll go and pour myself a large something or other, and sit with my good lady for an hour or so. All right. Thanks everybody for being in the chat. Thanks for being there.
End of stream. Yeah.
Yeah.